action potential occurs, now it's time to discuss how an action potential actually travels down a neuron. We're still in the neurophysiology part of the course, and so here are the outcomes for this lecture. Now, it is possible to categorize neurons as either myelinated or unmyelinated. An unmyelinated neuron doesn't have any myelin, and myelin is just a type of fatty insulation. As a result, when an action potential occurs, each area of the membrane must become depolarized. This causes the adjacent areas of that neuron to become depolarized, which causes another adjacent area to become depolarized, etc., until the end of the axon, or what we call the axon terminal, is reached. Essentially, what is happening is the opening and closing of voltage-gated channels along each piece of the membrane on the axon. This leads to an action potential traveling very slowly down the axon, or just to give you an idea of speed, we're talking about 1 meter per second. So this would mean that if you had an unmyelinated neuron in your leg that was monitoring or sending information about like temperature, if you stepped on something that was really hot, and in the case of someone like me that's almost 2 meters tall, it would take about 2 seconds for the signal from my big toe to get to my brain, telling my brain that I'm stepping on something hot. And then it would take another 2 seconds for the signal to get from my brain back down to my big toe to tell it to move. So that's 4 seconds. That's not ideal. However, in a myelinated neuron, the conduction speed is much quicker. Essentially what happens is the action potential jumps, and I'm using air quotes here, along the neuron between gaps in the neurons, or in the myelin. Okay? These gaps in the myelin are called nodes of Ranvier. And these are the only places where depolarization needs to occur. The way this works is called saltatory conduction. Okay? Now, saltatory means to leap. The action potential leaps or jumps because the myelin reduces the areas where ions can move. This means that depolarization only needs to occur at the nodes, which is where voltage-gated channels are located. So if you look at this GIF or GIF, depending on your preference, the neuron on the left shows how the signal travels in an unmyelinated neuron. Notice it goes really slowly. While on the right, it shows how a signal travels in a myelinated neuron. Notice how the action potential kind of jumps between the nodes. Okay. So saltatory conduction starts when the voltage-gated channels open. This allows a rush of sodium to enter the cell. This sodium then pushes the sodium that is in the cell towards the axon terminal. This movement of sodium depolarizes the membrane, which opens voltage-gated sodium channels that are at the next node. While it would be a ridiculously fast process if the entire neuron was myelinated, the nodes are needed because the sodium entering the cell can only generate so much energy to move sodium down the axon inside the cell. This is why the nodes exist. This essentially allows for additional pushes, and I'll demonstrate this in class. Saltatory conduction is extremely fast, with speeds reaching 100 meters per second. Okay, the fastest man ever ran 100 meters in 9.5 seconds. Okay, so we're talking about this would be doing a 100-meter dash in 1 second. Okay, think of Dash from The Incredibles. Now, while myelinated neurons increase the speed of conduction, so does the diameter of the neuron. A wide diameter means there are more lanes. In other words, more information can travel down the axon. Imagine how fast we could drive through Terre Haute if US 41 was a 10-lane highway, such as this freeway shown here. Okay, there would be so much room, especially if we just have the same number of cars. So same number of cars, but on a 10-lane highway. Now imagine if we had as many cars as is pictured here driving on US 41 every morning. It would take forever to get anywhere because of the small number of lanes. Similarly, temperature has an effect on conduction speed. Temperature is just a measure of how fast ions are moving. High temperature means ions are moving faster, which means an action potential will occur faster. So having said all of that, are you able to answer the following 3 questions? Can you compare and contrast how an action potential is sent in an myelinated versus an unmyelinated neuron? Can you explain why a neuron can't be completely myelinated? And can you identify different factors that affect the speed of conduction?